We did it.
Woohoo! Ben, I've missed you, the archivist. What's happening on your side of the world? Lots of hiking and skiing, I hear.
Yeah. Yeah. So I resigned from my corporate job of almost 20 years in July, and I've just been being a dad and yeah,
Brilliant.
traveling. Yep. Enjoying the time off, working the job I had. Holidays were nearly unenjoyable. And so, yeah, it's been great coaching, taking kids to school, which I've never been able to do. Yeah.
That's
Just
wonderful.
enjoying the little things that I missed out on. Yeah, it's been wonderful. It's been great. It's gonna be I don't want to live off my savings forever, so I'll be back in some kind of gig eventually, but I'm not in a big rush.
I bet not.
Yeah, my wife's probably a little sick of 24/7 me, but
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah. She's like, get out of the house. You can do whatever you want
yeah,
to do, but just get out of my hair.
yeah. So, but yeah, it's been a blessing for sure. But yeah, what about you?
Oh, well, speaking of children going to, let me turn this down. It looks like I'm peeking. I got this
You
fancy
sound great
ot.
to me.
Okay, good. Um,
Yeah, you're not
yeah,
loud at
so,
all.
oh, good. My daughter starts her first soccer practice, which is incredible this week. So I'm stoked about that. We've been practicing around the house and inside, and I have to say she's really good at kicking the ball, which makes me proud. And so that's a lot of fun. And we're building. We finished the first greenhouse dome with the star dome configuration that I do, like that thing, that configuration right
Yeah,
there.
the Japanese lattice or whatever the
Yeah.
exact. Or is that a
Yes.
different one that's not on your property?
No, it's Japanese lattice. It's for my neighbor. So we
Yeah.
finished that
Oh, cool.
yesterday, which was really cool. And then we got our good welding plan for the dome project. There's three different domes that we started pretty much late fall, and we got the superstructures up. And so now that things are starting to warm up, we're supposed to actually get snow flurries by the end of the week. After it warms up, where we have a few days in a row where we can get it nice and warm, we'll have the lattice up and we'll start doing ferro cement, which is exciting because everybody wants to see these domes here. So yeah, it's exciting stuff.
Yeah. Busy, I'm sure.
Yes,
You don't
yeah,
want snow when you're working outside all day.
especially with thin shell cement because the ferro cement's thin shell. It's like no more than an inch, thickness, and so that will
Hmm.
dry out too fast if it gets really cold. Like if it gets cold and the all that, it pulls the moisture too fast out of the concrete, and that's problematic.
Yeah. Yep, definitely weather sensitive, huh?
Yes, it is. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
time flies with kids, man. I mean, I remember our first interview, seeing your little girl in the background and
Hmm.
playing soccer now. Yeah, my oldest is playing basketball and he's 11 now. It's crazy to think about.
It's incredible. They grow like weeds, man. Fast, fast, fast.
Yeah, time once you have kids, I mean, really time just disappears. It's pretty nuts.
Yeah, it does. Well, it's good to see you, my friend. I saw you stepped into the YouTube annals just there for like a second a couple weeks ago. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, he's back. And then you step back out. I was like, oh, he's gone. But you've been on my
Yeah, I
mind.
mean, for you I'll make time. I feel bad for, maybe some of the other interviewers that are maybe going to hear this that I've bailed on. I've unfortunately just I've left quite a few people kind of in the lurch. And yeah, I don't spend a lot of time recording or YouTube or anything, to be quite honest.
Hmm.
So my day to day is still as busy as it was, even without the job. It's just my investment in time has pretty much just gone into the kids. And we watch. My wife's a stay-at-home mom, but we have probably anywheres from 4 to 10 neighborhood kids that we have throughout the day or that come over after school. So our day is pretty intense, let
I
alone with
bet.
3 boys. So, but, yeah, as I mentioned to you, I've just a few days ago, and Mike Stellium 7, we chatted a little bit, and he was saying kind of the same things as you. And I sat down and started working on Anomalous America for the first time in I don't know how many months it's been.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've kind of reignited my spark for wanting to knock out some more episodes. And me and you have been trying to get an episode together, and it's been this back and forth play between responsibility and things that pop up out of nowhere. And but yeah, and then you sent me this list of things you wanted to talk about, and it was perfect because I was finishing up some Atlantis stuff and correlating that with some ancient Roman, Etruscan overlays. And so when you sent me the things you want to talk about, it was great. It's like right in my wheelhouse of what I've kind of had on my mind the last few days.
Oh, that's wonderful. So this is where I'm at with things. I'm going to give a very condensed view of what I've been taking in. It's mainly from the Longo brothers. I believe that JT follows JC and Paul Stobbs. They put out a series that was actually a gentleman in 2016. His name was Werner Heinzen, that did this archaeological study all throughout Europe of, essentially all these dig sites. And he did a historical analysis on it. And what he was showing was pretty much a lot of what I almost named the wrong Russian,
Mhm.
Anatoly Fomenko put out, was essentially that history is a little bit too long. There's
Oh, I've been saying that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so between Gunnar and then Anatoly Fomenko, you could say that there's anywhere from 800 to 1,000 years that have been added to the timeline. Now, what
Hmm.
that does for me in thinking about what we have as buildings that were here in the U.S., especially in the 1800s, which I think you're the expert at. I mean, watching your series of all the different states and all the all these anomalous, massive, beautiful buildings that were pretty much in every state that there was, it's very obvious to me that there was a worldwide civilization that built similarly, whether you want to call them Etruscan, Greek, Roman. I just want to say Rome because I love the saying all roads lead to Rome. I just
Hmm.
love that. So we'll kind of stick with that theme. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to be like, I have a couple friends that are real sticklers with languages and etymology, and they're like, it's not Roman, it's Etruscan, or it's this. All that
Hmm.
aside, I'm going for the spirit of this thing, not the exact detail. Because in all honesty,
Of course.
none of us know the exact detail.
No.
But but it's obvious. Like we have this same style of buildings on every continent in the world, and I wanted you to kind of to enlighten us on what you have found with just for tonight. We're going to call them Roman style construction that was here, way before we had the capacity to actually build it. And if you're to believe what we are told about the founding fathers of the United States of America, was we're told that they wanted small federal government. Well, if they wanted small federal government and small government overall, why are the most massive buildings in the world dedicated to government? And why do they look
Hmm.
Roman? So that's where I'm at with everything at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the more I study Latin, the more evident it becomes. It's not like it's kind of the secret in plain sight, so to say, um, because the buildings are there. giving you a hint. The language is there, giving you a hint. There are all these hints,
Hmm.
right? And I can't remember what the term is for putting the answer right in front of you. Because it's really up to what they say about the whole thing's a journey, and you knock and the door shall be opened. Everything for the seeker is at their fingertips or in their footsteps, or however they choose to explore the realm through knowledge or the internet or on foot or through books or whatever. It's all right there waiting for you. It's at your beck and call. And when it comes to like, I've read a large chunk of flamenco, and his words always resonate with me, especially as I dive into these historical records, newspapers being one of my favorite mediums. I like to go even farther and say not only is there 1,000 years that's been added, but that's only when we're talking, generally speaking, AD, right? We're not
Hmm.
even going BC. Flamenco like won't even go there because he knows that'll be another 7 or 8 thousand-page books. Anyone that's read
Right.
flamenco knows how dense it is, and it's easy to get lost. I go even farther, and I like to say that these kind of, these Mesozoic, these so-called Saurian or dinosaur um, timelines, and these Ice Age timelines. They're so not only have they stretched AD, they've they've stretched BC. So it
Hmm.
goes both ways. And through a lot of my Anomalous America, but my other videos too, I like to kind of some of my quote monster videos where I discuss these creatures that survive these changeover events, as I like to call them.
Hmm.
Whether you want to say it was the fall of a vapor canopy or a small ice age. Um, but yeah, you can go either way with it, and finding the roots of not only the Romans, quote Romans, right? And I we'll get into the all roads lead to Rome concept and how that finds its oldest remnants here in the Americas. But yeah, also these monsters that existed in the 1700s and 1800s, from sea creatures to giant land mammals and reptiles, although their numbers greatly diminished, survived from this period that I like to bring much closer, not hundreds of thousands of years ago, but maybe 2000 BC, even much earlier than that. Um, but yeah, this theme of lost time or false time,
Hmm.
I love, and comes up a lot in my videos. And yeah, I mean, we talk a lot in our previous chats about this kind of mysterious age of the 1800s.
Yes.
What really happened in from 1800 until 1860. A lot of that you really, really have to look at it kind of with a flamenco mindset, and you
Hmm.
must question everything published. Even newspapers. People bring that up all the time, and I say that's the one negative comment I get is, just like journalism of today, how could you trust the journalism of this time period? And again, it's not for me to decide what people want to believe or choose to believe or anything. I've just built up such a large collection of material at this point that it's created a sort of narrative changing schematic. Not that it's here's absolute proof of lies or deceit or what the history was really like. But that was a long kind of rambling answer there. But I think Rome and the kind of false foundations of what we consider Rome today is a really big catalyst when it comes to the kind of Illuminati, uh, occult, um, big red buttons that kind of exist in this subculture that is, questioning the world and the narrative. And
Hmm.
but yeah, Rome's like the pinhead, and you can follow it from finance to religion to you name it. And you only have to go back through a few hundred publications or newspapers or whatever, depending on how specific your search is, to really find a completely different opinion of Rome and their foundations and who they are today. But yeah, sorry, that was a long answer, but good
That's
place to start.
perfect. It's a great place to start because essentially in the Christian world right now, there's this huge thing known as the little season. Like there's like almost like this massive correction from the dispensationalist movement. Are you familiar with the dispensationalist movement?
Surface level, I'm certainly aware of the ideas, but I can't go too deep on it.
So essentially, mid 1800s, the notion of Zionism was introduced into Christian
Correct.
doctrine.
Yep.
Prior to
Hmm.
that, the majority of the Christian world kind of believed in the liturgy of the saints and that essentially what's it called? I'm going to use the wrong terminology and get killed. Essentially, that Armageddon had already occurred. The
Hmm.
whole notion of what's it called when everybody gets sucked up into heaven? What do the Christians call that? I'm forgetting what it's called right now.
Uh, uh,
Um,
it's on the tip of my tongue.
I know it's
Starts with an
right.
R. The rapture.
The rapture. Okay, so the
Yeah,
rapture
that it's
doctrine
already
was,
occurred. Yeah, and we're living post rapture.
yeah, yeah. Well, so that the dispensationalists made the Christian movement a futurist movement. Now, the reason why this is relevant to us was this happened in the mid 1800s. This is
Hmm.
when this was introduced and started to be fomented along the world. So I had never known that. I mean, growing up as a Protestant, is pretty much like, Jesus is coming in the future sometime, and you just gotta like, the rapture and all those things were a futurist type thing. So the reason why I bring this
Hmm.
up is the artifacts. There's so many things that have been shown. Essentially, like when you stretch history out. Oh, it looks like I froze. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, yeah. Your video's choppy, but your voice is flawless.
Okay, so I'm gonna just. Sometimes I have to stop my video. I'll just stop the video
Yeah,
and then restart it.
I know how those country boys' internet can be.
Yep. Let's see this. Yeah, it's still showing I'm frozen looking down. That
Yeah. Yep.
that's hilarious.
It's okay. Yeah.
Well, hopefully it'll correct itself. So, uh, so the reason why this is relevant to us right now is the fact that what you have is if you stretch history out long enough, what you get rid of is catastrophe. And what the Christians are showing is that, like, actually, if you look at the events of the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD, it fulfills the Bible perfectly. I never knew that in 70 AD there was a Jewish Roman war that occurred, and it occurred exactly on the timeline that was prophesied, in that the temple was totally razed to the ground, and it happened within the generation that Jesus said it did. Like I said, being raised as a dispensationalist without knowing it, I had no idea about that. So to know that the temple was destroyed and it happened as Jesus said it would happen, in the generation of the people that slayed him, they would see that happen in their lifetime. That now shifts everything. And what these two people, Gunnar Heinzen and then also Fomenko, are showing is that they're saying the events that supposedly happened in the Middle East and the Mediterranean have all been split for like the time has been split where you'll have the protagonist and the antagonist. They'll split their stories of the same event into two different events, even though it's the same event, and then they'll add years to it. And once you see the algorithm, it's like it's so easy to see how they added so much time. So
Mm.
what this does then is it condenses everything because they're talking about the millennial reign of Christ happening. And during the millennial reign of Christ, that's when you could have this grand architecture because it's essentially 1,000 years of much more peaceful time. Oh, maybe my camera went off. Hold on one second. That's what's happening. Now it'll be better. Haha. So, so you see what I'm saying with that?
Of
Like
course.
there's,
Oh yeah.
I didn't come back on. What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't agree with everything Flamenco says, but I certainly know that the timelines have been um, messed with severely. And, as far as the millennial reign of Christ and the connections, with Tartaria or whatever you want to label it as, um, yeah, it seems like a very likely scenario considering, again, these worldwide similarities. Um, you know, to kind of name drop one of my favorite authors, Maurice Cotterell. Um, Basically, the sum of all of his literature is talking about these ancient sun worshiping cultures and how this worldwide religion existed. And it talks about a supreme deity born of a virgin mother, signs in the sky, traveling the realm, preaching the gospel, um, telling people, kind of explaining the ideas of righteousness and the better ways of living your life and mathematics and construction and blah, 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 blah. And then, again, building this kind of portfolio that I have with my YouTube channel, it really parallels that idea that we get lost in the overcomplication of things, and that to fill in these gaps in time that they had to create this lie, and the lie would be changing the calendars, the months, the days, losing our connection with the sky above, and taking away our kind of historical or parental historical, so to say, kind of our family lineage, the kind of idea that the most important thing about family was keeping a detailed historical idea and never forgetting the past, never for this kind of ancestral worship idea that coincides with these um, sun worshiping cultures. But yeah, I mean,
So
the millennial reign of Christ. I've never come across anything in my um, medium, the newspaper stuff, and I've never done any videos about it, but I continually refer to the concept and I talk about flamenco all the time. And I say, I'd say probably one of the largest underlining similarities is this manipulation of time
yes.
and this kind of the falsities that go along with it. Technology, construction, culture, similarities, language, they all continually go back to this universal source. And the muddying of that universal source has been the current geopolitical or um, religious, especially religions have played a huge role in this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you could go back in Christianity and, the Mohammedans and the quote Jews, they really were actually all saying the same thing. And all of that has been lost. And we've gotten away from this kind of subconscious understanding of who we are and our relation in this life and the solar system and as above, so below, the kind of universality of us all. And you've created this kind of schism of culture and religion and people, and fragmented everything in
Mm-hmm.
a time again. Going back to the time question is the biggest way to do that. And yeah, I'm familiar with those two gentlemen. I've seen little tidbits here and there. But yeah, I was talking about the millennial reign um, I don't even know, 7 or 8 years ago, and it seems more prominent now than ever. More people have caught wind of it and brought their 2 cents into it, and I think it's a good way to explain a lot of this missing um, cultural understanding of what came just 150, 200 years ago. Because I mean,
Definitely.
look at how hard it is to even explain that. I mean, you could have cultures with 1,000 years of kind of maternal paternal narrative and understanding of your history, your peoples, where you come from, origins, creator, all of these things, and that's all been lost. And I think mankind is as lost as it's ever been. And going along with this kind of that we're living post rapture, and if you look at a biblical explanation of what that time would be like, nothing's more evident that we seem to be on a course that is biblical in many ways.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. And with that, and if you can see that, like, essentially history has taken all catastrophe out of itself. It has made most catastrophe geological, and or try to play it explain it away with science. Once you start to understand that, and then you just look at the actual physical evidence of what we actually have in front of us relative to the timelines that we are given, it's just very obvious that, at the very least, the historical narrative given to us in the United States is dead wrong. So let's jump into
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Let's jump into this notion that all roads lead to Rome. You have some pictures and everything like that to show. Is that, did you said you had
I
something?
didn't really. I have. I have just. You know. I just doing what I do. I brought up a lot of Twitter posts that
Nice.
support
Okay.
some of the things we're discussing. That's about it. Pictures. It's just articles, just excerpts from articles. But yeah, all
Okay.
roads lead to Rome. I mean, it's something I've talked about a lot, and having family in the South, as you do, and having been to Rome, Georgia, several
Hmm.
times, and that there are the seven hills of Rome, Georgia, and
Right.
walking on them myself and seeing them myself, and that all roads lead to Rome, Georgia is literally the phrase they use for their own city. And one can just go look up the seven hills and find, I don't know what the list is now. Wikipedia doesn't even have half of what is actually out there. There's some pretty good books that cover it, but there's over 100 cities worldwide that are built on seven hills. Whether you want to go into an astrological reference and talk about the Pleiades, or maybe step back and just look at it from a religious, or even a kind of geopolitical reversal of how we look at the world today. How are these cultures looking, describing, and summarizing things in an almost identical way, just with their own twists and turns?
Right. Well,
And yeah,
Mario
the all
Garza. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, no, go
I,
ahead.
I think Pleiades is a huge misdirect. I think
Yeah.
the seven that they're talking about is Ursa Major, if not Ursa
Okay.
Minor. When you look at
Yeah,
the
the bear. I mean, that's yeah. I've made a lot of posts about how important that symbol is, and how the terminology and across so many languages, the bear is like almost universal in language. But
Mhm.
yeah, go ahead. The pole star and the and
Right.
Ursa Major are huge.
Yeah, so I mean, I know the swastika is the bad symbol, but let's put on our big boy pants here and just be adults about it. The swastika is just essentially showing the positioning of Ursa Major, and it wasn't. I think Mario was telling me it wasn't always a bear. I forget what
No,
the
no, yeah,
animal
of
was,
course. It's
but let
changed over so many cultures. Yeah.
but the actual seven stars that were there that
Hmm.
comprise that create the wheel
Of
around
time. Yeah,
this,
of
the wheel
course.
of time around the center. The
Yeah, I mean,
center,
there's the story that even the clock that we look at today and the two hands are just the two hands of Ursa in
right.
the pinwheel. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
with that, you know, the whole thing to think about is that the pole star is the center.
Hmm.
Whether a person wants to deny that or not, it's irrelevant. Our
Right.
whole sky, and I don't care about the shape of the Earth in this conversation at all. For the most part, for the majority of people that are on the planet, on the plane, on in the realm,
Hmm.
all the fixed stars they spin around the pole star. So the pole star is the center, is the hub. And
Hmm.
that being the hub, it's very, very important because if you're going to proclaim authority, you're usually going to proclaim authority from the center. You're not going to
Hmm.
proclaim it from the very edge or like midway through. You know, you're going to be what do they call it? Isotropic. You're going to be from the center out.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's
the
the way it's
monad,
going
of
to be. Exactly.
course. Hmm.
So
Yeah, and Rome. Since we're talking about Rome, but these symbols exist all over the realm.
right.
But we're talking about Rome, so I'll try to focus on that. You know, the pineal gland symbolism and the peacock and the staff. These are all symbols that, even to the bishop's mitre, are the symbology is all there. The
Mm-hmm.
cross. You mentioned the swastika, which is found on every continent. It's the oldest symbol, one of the oldest. Again, saying what's the oldest is silly to do, but it's found everywhere. And there's no coincidence that they used a world war to destroy a symbol. The war on symbols is part of the war on time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just as important. But um, yeah, it's really right there again. Like I was saying originally, that it's all in plain sight. You have to have the want to learn, and you
Mm-hmm.
find that this is something that it's a journey of it's your own journey. There's not going to be a school you can go to and you're going to learn all the secrets of life or anything like that. It doesn't work that way. But yeah, yeah, all roads lead to Rome, and um, Rome is not one place. But yeah, again, the pole star um, is a big indicator of that. And like you said, Centaur, right?
Exactly.
Me and you have talked about this already on your
Yes.
show.
Mm-hmm.
The plane of inertia, whether or not you care what shape the Earth is, it's really irrelevant. But the plane of inertia is, incredibly important and undeniable. Start talking about vacuums and the plane of inertia, and uh, yeah, we're living on a Taurus in a Taurus, however you want to look at. We're
Yeah.
just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl.
And look at Project Fishbowl for those of you out there that don't know what that is. It's kind of hilarious. Them testing the boundaries between the physical and the metaphysical. And here's a spoiler alert: they didn't win. They didn't get the result that they wanted.
No, yeah, whether you want to talk about Earth shape, I mean, our own government was telling you that there's a hard, fast barrier,
Yep.
that vacuums can't exist without them, and that we're gonna break past ours.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we're talking about going to the moon, and that's something else we're supposed to uh, believe wholeheartedly. There's just it gets laughable at a point.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Ben. Ben, in all of your research and looking at all these old newspaper clippings, how the practice of moving cemeteries, I've just come to find out, was like actually a pretty prevalent thing. Did you come across any of that in your research?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I've talked about huge mass graves, the biggest in the world found in America, and then having to dispose of the bodies to build new cities or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Railroads, I've shared my opinions on the railroads and expansion and the gold rush and all of these ideas, but all we were doing was digging up old foundations.
Right.
That's all we were doing in America. We've
Mm-hmm.
talked about this. Even the most horrible, hard to live desert landscapes of America were absolutely jam packed with people, advanced civilizations, New Mexico, Arizona,
Hmm.
Southern California, what we would call harsh wasteland of America, the American Southwest, housed millions, if not billions of people. And we don't need to go back, BC. I'm willing to go back 1600s,
Hmm.
1500s, and these massive, massive cities, kind of Romanesque, as we will get into, cities existed all over the realm, especially in America. And, you mentioned catastrophe, cataclysm. It's very evident, and many of these cultures discuss it, but something drastic happened, especially here in the Americas.
Hmm.
The Middle East shows a lot of this as well, but there are areas all over the realm that have been drastically altered in, I'd say, the last 400, 500 years.
Yeah. Yeah, the big
Yeah.
mystery
But yeah, as far.
of the fine sand. Because
Mhm.
these geological processes that we were told that take millions and millions of years, and this, that, the other. I have a
Mhm.
lot of, you and I are friends with Mike Wilkerson and his biogeology, and now so much of the coal veins and the
Yep.
precious metal veins that we find make so much more sense when you add in the titanic trees and
Absolutely.
the titan animals themselves. It
Mhm.
all kind of fits. And if this land was the land of, let's just call it the Greeks' depictions of the Titan Age,
Oh yeah.
it would make a lot of sense that there would be so much of it would have been laid to waste.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean the War of the Titans, right? Can you imagine?
Hmm.
Can you imagine a war between an elephant its size of, Mike Wilkerson's Mount Go and the other creatures roaming the realm? You imagine a tree 10 miles tall being cut down,
No,
you know, or laid to waste in an instant, right?
right.
So yeah, the sands, the the trees that were destroyed in a millisecond turned to dust. Giants turned to dust. Whether they turned to stone or were absolutely vaporized. But yeah, I mean, we could go. That's a whole nother age. As I've said many times, we're layered. Everything's
Yes.
cyclical. We're foundations on foundations on foundations on foundations. Rome is built on five or six beautiful civilization, cataclysm of some kind, rebuilt, wiped. It's just a wiping. The slate is cleaned and it starts again. The slate is cleaned and it starts again.
Hmm.
But yeah, so we don't need to go too far back since we want to focus on this kind of Rome and the clues that are left in America, showing these kind of hints. But yeah, the titans of the past. Uh, yeah, that's maybe a subject for another time. But yeah, I'm sure you've had Mike on, and no one covers it better than him.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the Rome thing. I'm at your behest of which direction, what
Yeah, you
states
you
you.
mentioned the cemeteries, so I don't want to get
Yes.
off because I want you to keep going with that thought. And but yeah, they found hundreds of thousands of bodies all over the realm. I mean, the big ones I can mention, in Montana, they found 75 plus thousand in a mass grave. In Tennessee, they found 80,000 plus in a mass grave. This is in, just a few acres of land.
Hmm.
And those areas are gone. You can't go to those today. Like a lot of these old papers, the mystery is solved, it's wiped, and the relics are taken away. And I
Disposed of.
mentioned this. I mention the Smithsonian all the time. They're designed for this type of situation, and the expansion of America was predestined and pre-planned, and the people responsible for funding it and its deliverance and the geopolitical things that went into it all. they all knew what was going on. They all knew that America had been destroyed by a flood or, volcanic, many things. But yeah, they were just uncovering um, a history they were well aware of, but it was kept from, the general populace.
Hmm.
But you look at the 1800s, and you there's never been a culture that looks so out of touch than when you study enough of the 1800s, especially in America. I've mentioned the orphan trains and the
Hmm.
fact that the Industrial Revolution was actually built on the hands of
Kids.
80% of the working force was children.
Yep.
So explain that. Um, Especially when you see old pictures of mine working. I mean, we had quote Mexican, Chinese, we had slaves from all over the realm working all the mines. Most of the railroads were built by slaves, um, and children were working in the factories. So there's just, yeah, there's just so many holes and unanswered questions, and no matter what you come up with, uh, the answers are quite dark and generally lead to a fact that there's not enough population to even support the expansion of a country like the United States, quote unquote.
Right.
And the foundations of America are all built on lies. But yeah, continue with your cemetery question.
Well, I wasn't even talking about these mass graves. I was talking about like actual an established cemetery from people like from a settler's town, and then like there's some sort of urban expansion
Okay.
or town
I
expansion,
was
and
thinking
then
like mounds and stuff.
no, I'm actually talking about, because what I'm trying to do here is establish a timeline. And what a lot of people
Got it. Okay. Sorry.
that are against this whole notion of there being historical fuckery, what they'll say is, no, well, look,
Mm-hmm.
we have this cemetery, and look at this headstone is from 1619, and this headstone's from
Mm-hmm.
1636, and this is the proof
Mm-hmm.
of, such and such was here, and my family line is this, and this, and this. And now I'm not saying that that's not
Yeah.
the case, especially in my family. We apparently have people that came over in the second wave of boats in Massachusetts. Like the last time I was in Massachusetts, we went to, apparently I had an ancestor that was like the mayor of Brant Rock, Massachusetts, like in the 1600s.
That's
Who,
crazy.
who,
I had
who,
a great 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 uncle that was in government in Massachusetts, Lynn County. So it's
where,
funny.
that's cool. Yeah, so and my wife has the same thing. Like,
And I
go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah,
No, after you.
my wife has the same thing. Like her last name, her maiden name's Smith. So you could just imagine how old that name is, and
Yeah.
they were actually related to the Penns of like William Penn, like the founder of Pennsylvania. So, like
Mm-hmm.
in my own family, there is apparently this long line of like a lineage that we can trace way far back. But even in that, there's
Mm-hmm.
aspects of my family that there's like no lineage, like there's no knowledge of
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. Now that just could be my ignorance to it, not saying that the history isn't actually there. But there's like a lot of people, like you said, I mean, you literally said it perfectly. The population that we had could not have supported the growth that we experienced in the traditional timeline. Like I have a skit that we're
Yeah.
doing, like we have a troupe here where we do these skits that are kind of making fun of things. And the skits all based on like us like looking back at our great grandfather and how productive he was. Like my great grandfather, he fought a two-front war while building his own home, farming, earning enough money to buy everything. He went ahead and took care of the family, and on his free time, he hauled, these massive blocks of granite to build a city hall for a town of like 100 people. It like makes no sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. No, none of it makes any sense. Yep.
Because
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
just
in
the orphan train stuff.
yeah. Just to finish that thought, I'm sorry, there's a little lag. I'm an
Please.
insanely productive person. I have 4 businesses. I have a family. I'm growing a domestead. Like I do the web stuff also as a passion project. And even at that, I couldn't even hold a candle to the mid 1800s man if the story was true of what they said that they could do. And I call
Hmm.
bullshit because when people I can't see people being that insanely productive. The most productive people I know would
Hmm.
look absolutely lazy from an output perspective relative to what we're told the founding people of this country did if it was done the way we were told it was done.
Yeah. Yeah. The way we were told it was done is certainly not the way it was done.
No,
And it doesn't take a lot of investigation to realize that.
right.
Um, yeah. You go down some of these rabbit holes looking for answers and you're just going to have more questions. That's
Mm-hmm.
almost always how it goes.
Most definitely.
But yeah, when it comes to cemeteries and you know, I always like to talk about the majority of my work is kind of showing what lies beneath. So when you're looking at a graveyard on the ground level and there's dates going back that far, I call bullshit immediately.
Exactly.
Um, there's enough evidence, especially going back to just Alaska, right? And the reason I've said this before that I started there was because Alaska is this cold, barren wasteland of sorts. Um, but they found the things they found there in the 1800s immediately tell you, okay, Alaska just 100 years ago, again, looking at it in the 1800s, so 1700s, was a densely populated place covered in advanced architecture and seemingly had a tropical climate
Mm-hmm.
because again where they're finding prospectors um, uncovered unbelievable amounts of um, abandoned towns, relics, cities, crazy things. Um, and then again, Alaska being where it is in the typical weather that they have there, really makes you question. Okay, so the timelines are either everything that's being written about Alaska in the 1800s is wrong, or everything that we're told about our history is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not you don't really have to choose sides, but Alaska, I thought was a perfect place to start because you immediately start questioning it. Well, what our ideas of the founding of America, the expansion of the West really was.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't. All it was digging shit out. That's all it was.
Yeah.
And they had to they had to create a man. I don't know how to say this. They had to grow humans to do it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
however you look at this kind of expansion of the children's and the orphan trains and the incubator babies and where all these populations were coming from. One of my first interviews ever was um, about orphan trains and baby farms, and
Mm-hmm.
that European royalty were growing, not growing like as but raising children on the 10, 20, 30, 50, 100,000 level and then
Phew.
shipping them all around the world. You dive
The
into that
Cabbage Patch
enough and you're
Kids.
going to go, what was going on? Yeah. What was going on? And then you find that, again, the Industrial Revolution and all of these things, the expansion of the West, was predominantly laid on the foundation of immigrants and children. Along with what you were saying, it's like, okay, so you look at, and that's why I like to share all these pictures of the 1800s of these cities. because many of the large cities in every state in America in the 1800s had really incredible buildings that
Hmm.
don't exist anymore and
Right.
were being built in an expanding city, like you said, where people had barely enough food,
Hmm.
barely enough resources, barely enough horses, but were mining, expanding, building, growing food, agricultural expansion. Like, again, knowing just enough of that and knowing the numbers it takes to get a city like that off the ground from a more of a historical standpoint, none of it makes any sense. And
None.
to put the kind of resources that these towns were putting into these government facilities, the asylum thing, me and you have talked about this a little bit on a previous show.
Hmm.
But if you just look at the amount of asylums being built between 1850 and 1870 in America, and then you look where they're being built, most of them are built in the absolute middle of nowhere. No railroad, no river. And the buildings are hundreds, 200, 300, up to 1,000 room
Hmm.
stone buildings. And you can't find any information on how those were built,
Right.
let alone when you think, okay, so how many horses, how many carts, how many men just to ship the materials here, let alone how many men, agricultural, feeding them, building. I mean, it's absurd.
You you
It's absolutely crazy. And then you go, why would we need this many asylums?
right.
We don't even have a population to build these buildings. Why would we need one with 700 rooms? And then you find out every state had 20, 30 or more of these buildings with 500 plus rooms. It's just crazy. What was going on? you
Yeah.
know?
It's
Oh my gosh.
the first time that kind of bugged me a little bit was watching the first time I saw the movie Shawshank Redemption. And I saw it in the movie theater.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing how grandiose that building was because they took all these panoramic shots around this like
Hmm.
massive, like it's a prison, in the movie. And it probably was a prison,
Yep.
an actual prison, but we're talking about asylums and prisons. But when I'm watching the movie, the very first time I watch it, I'm like, why would they go to the time and expense to build a fortified building that is like a castle as a prison? In my mind, this was in the 90s when that movie came out, and it's one of my favorite movies of all
Hmm.
time. And I was just like, but I was stumped, because there was like some contradiction in the space. Like, how is this a prison? And, part of the storyline of the movie, for those of you that haven't seen it, is that Andy Dufresne, the protagonist in the movie, he digs through a wall. He has to dig through a wall that's a wet wall, by the way. And just if you guys don't know what that means in plumbing, your wet wall is a wall, it's a barrier between you and plumbing. So, like pipes and things like that. Your wet wall is usually thin.
Yeah, so you can access it.
So you could access it. This guy digs through a wet wall that's like a
It's like
foot.
30 feet.
Like it's so thick. Like it takes him, I think, 20
Oh, yeah, yeah, the
years.
concrete. Yeah, sorry. Hmm.
It takes
Yeah, he's
him.
got his little chisel in the Bible.
It takes the dude 20 years with his micro chisel to dig through the wet wall of one of the wet walls of this place, and you're just thinking, okay, who in their right mind, like what budgetary person? I could imagine the treasurer for the the legislature of Massachusetts being like, okay, guys, I'm going to approve the budget for this building. We're going to build this massive prison. Let's make the
Hmm.
walls 20 feet thick. Like it would not happen. That's not true. Like, and I know I'm talking about a fictional story, but that fictional story is based off of real buildings. They had to give it some factual basis to it, right? It's an
Yep.
absurdity. And you see this with the asylums everywhere. Like I was watching this series that John Levi did in Utah. And the asylums that he was showing was they were straight up castles. Some of these high schools that you showed up in your anomalous Washington, they're straight up castles. Those aren't
Hmm.
asylums or high schools. Those are just
Yep.
repurposed, rebranded castles. That's what they are.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, like, my home city, Portland, Oregon, the downtown in the 1800's. I mean, it was just castle after castle after castle, and they're high schools or government buildings,
Mm-hmm.
or it's the town railroad uh, millionaire.
Right.
And that's every city. It's every big city has this. They literally are just stamping the same story on all of these places.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the Shawshank thing is really great. Great. You can still take tours of Shawshank, and you look at that building today. You know what it would cost to build a building like that out of complete stone
No.
walls that are 10 feet thick? I always like to use the example of the Philadelphia building. Oh man,
Yeah.
it's a government building.
That they tried to
Um,
demolish.
yeah, and you know what they came up with? And I've mentioned this in a few videos. They wanted to tear this building down. It's going to bother me. Philadelphia. Um, Man, what was it called? Mm. Anyways, it has like 700 rooms, and the walls are like 10 feet thick.
Mm-hmm.
City Hall, Philadelphia City Hall. And in the late 1800's, they wanted to tear this thing down. And you know what they came to the
Impossible.
conclusion of? They're like, this would bankrupt the entire US government. That's what they said.
I love it.
So when you look at the narrative of that, and then you start again, that's another rabbit hole that I've talked about in my episodes before. That when you start breaking it down and doing your research, and you go, how many buildings were torn down in the 1800's? It's thousands, and
Mm-hmm.
they're monsters. Okay, so the labor and the money just for that doesn't make any sense when we're talking about that we're an expanding country. Everything's tight, labor's tight, money's tight. We barely have enough food to feed the population in especially the eastern states. People just look up Philadelphia City Hall, look up this building. It goes like 7 stories below ground.
Mm-hmm.
One of my subscribers worked at this building as a maintenance person. Okay, firsthand experience. I'm not going to say the person's name. Says that he's seen at least 7 floors below ground. The
Wonderful.
maintenance crew, the maintenance crew is 50 people to maintain this building. There's like 700 rooms. The walls are like 5-6 feet thick. In some places, it's like 10 feet thick. And you look at the building and it looks top heavy, meaning when I look at it, it looks like there should be another 7-8 stories of it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this person, after I had said this in a video, reached out to me, and he included some really amazing photos he took with his phone. But this is just one of hundreds of buildings like this. And yeah, like I had just said, they wanted to tear it down, but they were like, this building's just going to have to stay. And if people look at it and go, where'd this come from? Look at this thing. We're just going to have to go, yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to run their chance and know that certain people will look at this and question its origin. Very few. I mean, what's the percentage of the American population or even the Philadelphia population that's going to look at this building and go, how do they do that in that time frame? Let alone the resources involved. People don't even understand how many actual type of industrial inventions and things go into building one building.
Mm-hmm.
Like we talked about, wet walls, plumbing, electrical, machining, stonework. There are so many facilities in an industry. It takes thousands of industry just to build one building, let
Yes.
alone, and then you have to calculate the employees and transportation and quarrying all of this stone. And But yeah, like you said, everything has a mark of repurposing, and that's why, again, the joke that I always like to use is that's why it's called Freemasonry, because every town is founded by a Freemason. The
Hmm.
lodge just said, you're a governor of this new town, you're a governor of this new town, you're a governor of this new town. When you get there, here's the buildings you're going to take over. You got to start a lodge immediately. Anyone that comes up through the town, through the government, again, Latin, what does government mean? It's just mind control. You're governing
Yep.
the mind, and that's what you're going to do. And if they're not a part of the club, they can't rise. And if they want to, they got to join the club. And that's every single city in the 1800s.
Yes.
It's ran by a Mason, and it's built by Masons, and it's Freemasonry because they just moved into a place and took it all over, and it was just abandoned cities. Again, that's not always the case, but that's a generalization, painting with a broad brush. But yeah, I mean, mentioning Rome and all roads lead to Rome, one just needs to look at the Philadelphia City Hall, especially pictures of it in the 1800s, and you're going to see wood shanty houses outside of this building. And that's always one that makes me laugh, is you look at these expanding cities where they're putting all this money into these amazing stone castles, like the word you used, in their high schools and their
Right.
government. How many government employees do you have? 700 government employees, to fill these buildings. It's like, I know the population's like 1,000 in most of these towns. It's obviously larger in some cases, but they're very small. And the government kind of city hall, city square, central area of these towns, you'll have these amazing stone buildings, and then you'll just have wood shanty houses all around them. And yeah, you just look at construction of today, and it shows you this quite
Th-
clearly. Yeah, that what a great picture. That's the one I was looking at. But yeah, I mean, just look at that thing.
I mean, look at this. That was not done by slaves, guys. That's not a wage slave thing.
Yeah.
That is so magnificent. Now, are we still being seen on? Was that coming through on OBS?
Yeah, I saw it. Yep.
Okay, great.
So yeah, since you mentioned the taking the buildings down thing, I think that's, again, we're going to cover so many bases and kind of rabbit holes, but depending on which rabbit holes you choose to go down, you're
well,
always
let's.
going to be left with more questions than answers.
Yeah, the railroads and roads. Those two things are need to be addressed first of all, because whenever you're doing construction, you have to have ingress and egress to your job site. I've built
Yep.
I've built whole developments, and I've built them in areas where I had to put in roads, and I had to put in not only roads, I had to shape the land for water management so that those roads would actually do what they're supposed to do, handle the amount of weight for the building material. I mean, when you look at a building like the Philadelphia City Hall and like a lot of these other state capitol buildings where they literally have single piece marble pillars that are 30 feet long, the weight of that, there are not modern trucks with like 1,000 horsepower diesel that can move the weight of some of these things. So
Nope.
that's where my mind goes. And even if you did have those trucks or trolleys or whatever that they were using, you would have to have it over firm ground. And what drives me nuts is we're watching the show 1923. It's a derivative of Yellowstone. And they're showing,
Hmm.
1923 Montana. And they're going to like the big town and everything like that. And everybody's still riding horses. And there's only one rich guy with a car. And I'm like, yes, that might have been that way in the 1900s after things were like, I guess you would say deconstructed to be reconstructed. But if that was the State of the Union in 1923, you couldn't have had the Capitol building being built in Helena the way it was. I mean, that
No.
building is magnificent. It
Hmm.
is so beautiful. So the roads in the railroads are something, and people have no idea how heavy a railroad tie is, let alone
Yeah.
laying the steel down. So for
Hmm.
those of you that don't know, when you're building a track, first of all, you have to have the ground have, you know, 6, 7, 8 feet of like base, rock base underneath to handle the weight of the train and the locomotive and everything. Then you lay these railroad ties, that are perpendicular to the actual metal rail that you're laying down. Like
Hmm.
the weight in the distances that you're told. There was another show because I love watching period pieces. It was called The Gilded Age, and they were talking about this railroad magnate that he just like decides to lay another 500 miles of railroad along his competitor's line just to do it, to like be to monopolize it. And I'm like, that could not happen. Like it the amount of materials that you're talking about relative to production capacity and movement, it does no. It's more akin to what you were talking about, where this stuff was dug up. It was literally founded. It was well, for like railroads, they didn't repurpose it. They just probably got rid of the old engines and of the really efficient stuff, and then
Hmm.
went ahead and brought in their coal fired stuff. But it's just like, I always talk about weight in construction. You always have to think about the weight of things. And if you don't have the proper railroads or the proper roads, and you're building heavy buildings, that's an impossibility. Like the two can't cancel each other out.
Yep. And people talk about water, but then you look at the naval capacities in this time frame, and river transport again being a big one. It didn't exist. There were some fairly large ships moving pretty large weight, but they were all ocean going vessels. When you look up some of the biggest ships that were navigating the Mississippi and the Missouri, and their weight capacities, then you have to think about the infrastructure involved in not only quarrying them but transporting them and then offloading them.
Right.
The advanced machinery and industry that's quarrying these things, transporting them, and loading them has to be as advanced as at the offload site as it
Yes.
is at the loading site, and that's another thing that people don't quite understand. But yeah, roads are huge, and that's the big one I like to talk about because people go, "Oh, the railroad expansion was everything." Sure, but the thousands of miles distance from major railroads to where these cities are popping up. And that's why I always like to use the asylum reference, because many of them are built in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Many, I'd say over half of them are in towns of with the only population are the employees that work at the asylum.
Mm-hmm.
So the narrative again of roads and railroads and rivers, it's an impossibility.
Right.
And that is the most blatant one, because a lot of the early cities in the 1800s were built on rivers for obvious reason, industry, transportation. So they can use that as an excuse in a lot of cases to explain away the infrastructure that is already existing,
Mm-hmm.
as it there's a lot of access because we live on the river or whatever. But there are just too many examples that don't add up and show you, like you were saying, that it would require a 300-mile road that couldn't be dirt, or you'd
Right.
only be able to build for 2 months of the year because rain or snow. Right. I mean, Alaska, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Montana, there are beautiful, elegant cities all over these places where half the year your ability to transport with a horse and carriage, let alone whatever else nonsense they're telling us, they don't exist, or they're extremely limited. So then the idea of some of these monster buildings being built in a year. I mean, even the Wikipedia stories don't make sense. 1 year construction, 2 year
No.
construction, everything is stone built. All the
Right.
walls are stone, you know? Yeah, it gets it gets to a point where you can look at it really quick and go, this is a joke. You don't even have to dive into it. You already know. I could read into this and I could do a whole video on just this one part of town or this one building, like the Philadelphia building. And I know that every piece of information I'm going to get in from public venue is going to be completely ridiculous and absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it keeps going. It's like the fires and the buildings being torn down, all these fires. Every major city that we're talking about that has these castle like buildings that have been taken over and turned into schools or post offices or city halls or Masonic buildings, 90% of them have been wiped from the earth
Mm-hmm.
through either being disassembled by hand or burnt to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
In events where you start to look into the weather or the newspaper reports, and it's like a cataclysm, like fire tornadoes. A lot of these cities that burnt, the type of event that was going on defies any explanation, especially when you're dealing with cities that at the time were 80-90% brick and
Right.
stone mortar.
To
So, that's
on that
again for another.
on that point, Ben. So we just had a series of we had a last Friday we had tornadoes rip through this area. They started the frontal boundary started in Oklahoma and then came through here in Missouri and dropped at least 18 tornadoes as it came through. So it was an active night, right? And but what
Mhm.
was weird was on the back end of it, first of all, after the frontal boundary came through, we had haze for a whole day, which usually when those storm fronts come through, it cleans the air. This was very odd
Mhm.
that they came through and the next day it was just hazy, which was kind of gross. But that night that those tornadoes came through in Oklahoma, 3 towns were devastated by fire tornadoes, like fire tornadoes. And
Yeah.
guess
Oh my
what?
gosh.
Guess what? These were red brick buildings. Like the I only saw two little news excerpts because my neighbor, she's from Oklahoma, and she was like, look at this, and so she posted it on Telegram, and I was like, whoa, fire! I build thermal mass heaters and rocket mass heaters. I use brick as the interface with fire.
Mhm.
I use it because it's very resilient to heat, right?
Yeah.
Apparently not. Apparently I've been doing that wrong forever.
See what I mean? Like somebody who's an expert can look at that and go, this doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
The temperatures required to do that kind of damage are off the charts,
Yeah, yeah.
unexplainable.
Yeah, cuz
So then you look at all these cities that had fires like this, and it's hundreds, and many cities had multiple fires.
right.
So yeah, it's just history is it's less a mystery and more of a lie than it's ever been. And um, yeah, I guess my kind of channel's goal is to kind of, to the best of my ability, share my opinions on certain subjects and kind of bring some of these older newspaper reports to light and get people kind of thinking and try to have fun while doing it, which can be hard to do. These subjects can be a little dark, and it takes kind of a seasoned vet like yourself to digest all this stuff and not let it put you in a really dark place.
Yeah. Well, this is why I kind of like the little season action because when you look at the fact that there were all these asylums, there's actually been a couple people have found inter new like inter asylum newspapers that were being made, and one of them was talking about how the majority of the people in the asylum believed that in the millennial reign of Christ. So this has the
Whoa.
people.
I would love to see that.
Yeah,
After the
yeah,
show, you got to try to find that for me.
yeah. I know it's on Paul Staub's Telegram because that's like a huge piece of evidence. Um, so So the reason why I actually look at this and it's almost like it builds faith is like we know we've been lied to about everything that's worth knowing. And there's sort of a degradation that's occurring. Like in most physical systems, the older those systems get, the more they break down. There's obviously, we come from very noble and dignified backgrounds. Like whoever those humans were, or the humans with the angelic help, however it was built, it was magnificent. It shows the
Hmm.
pinnacle of where our consciousness could be. Because I've
Yeah,
walked into some of these buildings and it's a different consciousness. It's a conscious,
absolutely.
it's a spiritual, like the grace that's in these buildings. These were built with love. They weren't built by wage slaves. You
No.
know,
Nope.
yeah, yeah. And so knowing that, it's just like, okay, so I've been lied to about everything. There's like millions upon millions upon millions of tons of evidence of these magnificent grandeur that was here. And then there's obviously a timeline distortion that's in there. This is all really pointing to hiding the real truth of our history, as we started
Hmm.
saying. But why would there be such an endeavor to hide it? Like, why would there be such an endeavor to wipe away the notion that we came from dignified roots?
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of energy to hold a lie or a narrative that's false for as long as it's being
You would
held.
need to wipe a culture and start it from the ground up,
Right.
which is exactly what we're talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
And
New Atlantis, New Babylon, how it's gone by many names. The rebirth of America, especially from an occult perspective, um, has fallen under many names. Um, but man, what you said about the millennial reign of Christ and the asylums, I've come across a few interviews with asylum people in asylums, and they're all incredibly interesting. One of them was from a man that said that he was a pharaoh, an Egyptian pharaoh, and that all the mummies were going to return to life
mhm.
at a set time when some kind of event would happen, biblical, celestial, and they're all very interesting. So when you say that a lot of the people in those asylums were aware of that subject, is very evident to me. I like to say, just like I mentioned, the creatures, some of these crazy monsters that they're writing about in the 1700s, 1800s, are very symbolic of a previous age. Just like I think that the asylums were there to house the people that knew the truth.
Right.
I think that's all it is. There are examples of crazy people, but why are you building prisons and asylums separate? Why are
Mhm.
you keeping, and again, this is what I was mentioning about why asylums are so far away. The narrative is, well, these crazy people, well, why are prisons right next to big cities?
Mhm.
But the asylums are out in the middle of nowhere. You know what
Good
I mean?
question.
Because
Yeah.
that's the real truth. That's where the real survivors of the event, whatever it was, cataclysm or not, spiritual or not. Um, I think that's why, going back to what we were talking about, knowing how much it takes, how much industry goes into building a building like the Philadelphia building, let alone all these asylums,
Mhm.
the resources, the labor, right? It's impossible given the amount of information we're given. So we're either given the wrong information or they're from a previous time frame, or both.
Mhm.
That's what I say. And why go to such extremes to house people in these types of situations? Well, there's obviously, like you said, it goes along with the lie,
Yeah.
the amount of effort that they've gone to, they, in parentheses, to perpetuate this lie, right? Um, the so-called SOS, the so-called kind of season of Satan that
Mhm.
we may be finding ourselves in, you know, and yeah, it's very interesting for sure.
I had many before I got into any of these like research into all this type of stuff. I was hanging out with a few shamans in Central America at a very deep level. It wasn't that I was just hanging out for them. I was building malokas and areas for ceremonial spaces. So it was something that I was very into, I believed in. And, you know, one of the shamans had come out of the forest one day, and he was visibly shaken, and I was like, what did you see? Like what was it? And he's like, there are so many spirits that want to get into human bodies, like so many you couldn't even imagine. And at that time, I didn't have that conceptualization. Like hearing that was like shocking to me. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, it's at least 5 to 6 to 1 ratio of spirits that are trying to enter human bodies than there are human bodies. And I was like, at first I was kind of perplexed by him giving that ratio, because that's tremendous. And
Mm.
then he is like, they're all around you all the time. And I'm like, what? Because I'm not aware. Like I have a decent level of awareness, but I'm not aware of that.
Of course.
That's pretty significant. And he's like, yeah, it's God's grace that you're not aware of it. And I'm like, why would it be that way? Like why would there be? Because I was, at that time that he was telling me that, I was like astral traveling and getting out of my body.
Hmm.
And I was like thinking I was under the delusion that leaving the body was the grace, not having a body.
Mm.
And
That's kind of the
he,
trick, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. I was under that, and I say delusion. I said delusion because it was a delusion. And
Mm.
he's like, the biggest miracle that there is God granting you a body, because everything wants to have a body. Every spirit wants to have a
Mm.
body. And I'm like, well, why is there such a backlog? I actually said that. And he's like, because it's the end of days.
Yeah.
Now
Powerful.
I didn't ask him what he meant by end of days. I took it like from the Protestant, Christian perspective, the dispensational, like, oh, Jesus is
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I, I
Yeah.
I didn't take it the next step. Like, what do you mean by end of days? But let's just say, like, since that point, since that particular moment, I spent another 10 years in medicine circles and got to experience a lot of this extracurricular energy that's out there, and it's not good. Like, I would say the majority of it isn't a benefit.
No.
The majority of that world doesn't have your best interests at heart, let's just say. In
No.
fact, we're given like this realm, and we're actually protected here by our conscious mind. Our conscious mind is actually protecting us.
Hmm.
And a lot of people, especially that are in more of like the new age movement and things like that, are unaware of that fact. And
Oh yeah. It's
so,
it's a God's. It's a gift. The EMF fields and the spiritual barriers given to you. Your heart barrier.
mhm,
Um, looking at the picture behind you with the dome, and we talked about the torus a little bit.
mhm,
Um, the kind of as above, so below. Um, Mirroring of everything, God's creation. There's mirrors of, everything in you is mirrored in the world around you.
right,
But yeah, the heart barrier, is huge. What's the biggest way to affect one's ability to protect themselves? And it's to damage that barrier. And since we're talking about the 1800s and And a lot of the things that popped up that are questionable, since you were mentioning this, alcohol and the creation of public access to spirits, being alcohol, hard alcohol, and beer.
Mm,
Well, the expansion of the brewing industry, hard alcohol and beer included, runs parallel to this creation of this new false society.
mm-hmm,
And it's really huge there, because I'm sure you're aware of this and have experienced it probably a little bit yourself. But there's a reason why alcohol is called alcohol, right? The Arabic root of
mm-hmm,
alcohol is just the your body's weakening of its protective field,
mm-hmm.
and these spirits that you say are waiting, that's that's how they gain access in a lot of cases.
Yes.
And you look at the degradation of the kind of blue collar worker, and the alcoholic um, industry that exploded in the 1800's parallels all of that. And I think um, we're just such a lost people, and there's all these ways to disconnect. But like you said, you meet somebody really tuned in, um, that's what they're going to tell you. Like, hey, I know you want to experience these other realms and go on these. You want to be a psychonaut, but let me tell you that there's a cap to it,
Mm-hmm.
and all it should help you do is realize that this actual sober life you're living is the real gem and the special one, and
Mm-hmm.
protect it. you know and yeah, I always warn people to be careful with that. Psychedelics, there's a lot of healing and great benefits that can come from it, but all
Mm-hmm.
it should be helping you do is love your sober life and take better advantage of it. And I do
Yeah,
think that's lost.
that's a wonderful way of saying it. And that was my experience. And the thing is, it will match your intention. As long as you're not naive and you actually, have the capacity to be around people that are trustworthy in that space, the medicine will match your intention. So,
I
and
agree. Yeah.
it was very clear with me when I was done with it. It was like, you're finished with this, and I was like, oh, good. you know,
Yeah.
I was like, 60 sessions in, I'm like, okay, I'm solid. So what the reason why I brought that up is this is I can't help but talk about physical things through the funnel of spirituality,
Mhm.
because that's how I came up. I came up with spirituality first, and then science and history second. And so I'm kind
I
of
was the opposite, so that's perfect.
so I'm gauging things by the essence of what it would take from a spiritual perspective for something to occur physically. And I had a friend of mine. I came to know this person. I wasn't a friend of hers when she did this, but she figured out how to measure the resonant harmonics of any structure. She did this for 7 cathedrals, and then when she found out the resonant harmonic of the structure, then she would run that frequency through a cymatic plate. And what would occur is the cymatic plate would always end up being a direct reflection of the rose window that was above that particular cathedral. So
Mhm.
the level of consciousness that was building those cathedrals, and let alone these Capitol buildings, like I do,
Mhm.
I build domes. Like I build a very simple but advanced way of building domes. Do you know how many teeth I have to pull to get just the people that are actually even into it to like see it all the way through? And the reason why I tell anybody
I can
about that,
imagine.
I tell anybody that wants to increase their intelligence, just build a dome, because you're living in boxes your entire life. You have no idea what that's actually done to your spatial awareness, and let alone then how it wires your brain. The second
Hmm.
you start to build something that's curvilinear on all axes, and then you're arching and you're having to move your body and engage your entire form under stress to actually see this thing realized, it changes your consciousness. Like you don't come out the same. You become a changed being. And I'm doing rudimentary stuff. Like I'm doing stuff on such a small scale that, my goodness, the Parthenon, or even like, let's just keep it even on a smaller scale. Let's just say these in 48 states, they have a domed capital. Like,
Hmm.
guys, come on, come on. They just didn't have these domed capitals in every state, but like just by willy nilly. Like, oh, we like the design. It's the stamp of the previous civilization's consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. The circle and the square. I mean, there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Square in the circle. I mean, you always wanted to harmonize with nature. You didn't build anything in a straight line.
No.
Your lines always had curvature to them. And looking at your picture behind you of your dome, you can see the kind of fractal nature of it just by looking at the lattice structure
Mm-hmm.
from the from the view from atop. You get that cymatic
Mm-hmm.
structure, plain as day. Yeah, and you think of again going to as above, so below. The celestial. Almost all those Capitol buildings have celestial symbols in those domes,
Right.
so you can tell that they're mirroring the heavens. They're
Mm-hmm.
bringing the heavens down, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's what all these cultures did. The mounds, these massive pyramidal complexes, it's as above, so below. They're mirroring the heavens. And these dome Capitol buildings, that's exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't a Capitol building that doesn't have pole star, the 72 stars or 72 degrees, the zodiacal numbers embedded in them. And
Mm-hmm.
anyone that's listening to this that has access to a Capitol building, I challenge you to go there and you'll be amazed by what you see. Yeah.
Magnificent.
Yeah, it's a secret in plain sight, like I've been saying all along. It's right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how few people really see it. It's crazy. And like you started on with the shaman in Costa Rica, I believe, who said it's end times. It certainly feels that way to me, you know. And I've never been scared of um, that phrase. For me, I've always been at peace with it. It seems like something beautiful. I don't quite know what that means, but I know that in my lifetime there's going to be some big some big change,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just looking forward to it. And I feel like I'm just kind of playing a role. You know, I got my mask on. I'm kind of an actor in God's script,
Right.
and I was driven to this type of material and questioning reality and searching for my own answers.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of inner voice thing, and to have conversations like this with you and a lot of the other people I've met on this journey is worth it 100%. You know, I'm sure for someone like you who's traveled a lot, the rare occasion you meet somebody where you can have really expansive conversation, how rare and unfortunate that is, but it's rare.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, when you walk into these buildings and you see the beauty and you feel the difference, um, and then you go, how did we get here?
Exactly.
These EMF soup jungles of square straight lines, and yeah, it definitely seems like we hop timelines and we're on a really shitty bad one and we're riding it out. We're almost at the end. At
Hmm.
least I'm hopeful.
If you
But yeah.
had if because I know I'm jumping around here a little bit because I have so many questions. I know that we didn't say that we are going to talk about cosmology, but I always end up getting back there one way or another. Um, so another reason why the millennial reign of Christ is appealing to me is that it actually fits what we are experiencing. I am still sort of a rubber meets the road type of person. And like the faking of all the stuff in the Middle East, that's something that you and I have talked about or have alluded to at least, is like,
Mm-hmm.
that being the center of civilization. No, no, not at all. Um, and this whole essentially getting everybody's attention to look over there, it's like the whole smoke and mirrors game or the squid ink. I think there's been a
Mm-hmm.
huge amount of distraction to keep people away from looking at the North Pole. I'm somebody that studied magnetics under like two masters in magnetics. Um, One of them, his name was Floyd Sweet. He passed a few years ago, and he was pointing out in like the 80s like how true magnetic north was drifting towards Siberia out of like the Canadian aspect. And this was
Mm-hmm.
back in the day when I still believed in a globe. But now when I think about it, I'm like, what is magnetism and what would create true magnetic north? I mean, it's definitely not the globe model of, because just the Curie point alone proves that that's utter nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a drift of north, and it is heading from our perspective here in the US, it is heading east. And it's heading east very, very quickly. It's not like a mile a year or something. It's like 40 miles a year. It's like a big deal. And that's a lot of distance traversed over a bunch of years. And I look at the frozen tundra of Russia, Canada, Greenland, northern Alaska, the frontal boundary, where east meets west in the Bering Straits. And there's all these new artifacts and new things. They're not new. I should say they're new discoveries to me at least about up in these
Of course.
upper northern areas that they're actually the Greek language was prevalent pretty much all around everything that actually encircles the North Pole. Um, and that's very fascinating to me because I was given a vision 11 years ago that the key to the heart of the realm was through the Bering Straits. It was like if you were in Hawaii and you were to go towards the Bering Straits, that there was more land. That was like the vision and the whole thing that was. It could have just been my imagination. But what's so weird about that, I got that in 2014, and then 2015 the whole flat earth thing blew up. And now
Mm.
there's all this evidence that, like you were saying, Alaska was heavily populated. Northern
Yep.
Russia was heavily populated. Like
Mm-hmm.
all these, like Helsinki, in Finland and going north in Sweden, they were heavily populated. So it wasn't like this like crazy cold barren wasteland, in the very near past. It was like actually thriving.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
When the American troops were building their air defense bases all along the Aleutians,
uh
they kept finding buried cities
huh.
all over the Aleutians. I would say there's a good chance that every one of the Aleutian islands has a buried city on it.
Could you tell
For
people
listeners
where the
out there, just
Aleutians?
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the chain of islands that go from Alaska all the way over to Russia. Essentially, they
Hmm.
stop a little before, but they go pretty close. And yeah, since you brought it up, they found Greek pottery,
Hmm.
Greek inscriptions, Roman style buildings in Alaska. Um, uh, some gold prospectors. Um, there was some heavy rain in Alaska, and a large side of a mountain had washed away. And these prospectors went and looked and found this whole city exposed, covered that was completely covered. And they described it as being Greek in every way, with fantastic architecture, beautiful pottery,
Hmm.
inscriptions, artwork. And that's just one of the dozens of articles I cover in that episode. But they find literal cities,
Hmm.
and they call them beautiful. They go as far as to say mosque type, church like buildings,
Hmm.
literally frozen, just frozen cities in Alaska. Along with, I go into the tropical evidence that Alaska, even in the articles, they're saying that they think that our geological understanding of time is absurd, and that Alaska was densely populated by an advanced culture, and it had a tropical climate within a 500 years, I believe is what the author said. That correlates quite nicely with what I was saying too. And that perhaps this millennial reign coincides with some kind of event that changed not only the topography, but the weather patterns, or, you know, something along those lines. And that I believe the northern latitudes were the most densely populated parts of the realm around the North Pole.
Yeah.
And then
Which,
that changed very recently. I mean,
yeah.
you can go back to the 1700s, and Greenland is literally covered in massive cities, all of
Hmm.
Greenland. And the U.S. government, I can't remember what it was called. World War II, they had a secret project called Iceworm, I believe is what the name of it was.
Ice worm.
They developed a nuclear powered melting drill. I believe they were exploring all these frozen cities.
Yeah.
They didn't say that. They said they were building a missile defense system, but I believe they're exploring everything under the ice, just like the Antarctic stuff. You know, World War II, I think, and again, what's the only real treaty that's been held?
That's
The
right.
Antarctic Treaty. And what will show you more that the whole geopolitical world is a theater? It's all a movie. It's all fake.
Yes.
Than to understand that all these countries that have these fake wars with each other all agreed, okay, well, up here we're enemies, down here we all get along and we all follow these rules. Well, that only exists in the Antarctic Treaty. So everything north is theater, and it's all a show. And I think that the northern latitudes and the southern latitudes are the most heavily guarded regions on Earth for a very particular reason. And I've done a lot of videos on the northern latitudes and the Antarctic zones, and they went as far as to say there is an ice wall. It's relatively recent, and that there are cultures living beyond them, and that it's tropical.
Hmm.
This is before Admiral Byrd. These articles I share are before Byrd's expedition, where he said there's tropical lands, warm climates, 70 plus degrees, just a
Hmm.
few hundred miles beyond the cold regions of Antarctica. So yeah, there's much more to this realm. I would say there's certainly land beyond the maps we're given,
Hmm.
you know, and yeah, the mystery of the North Pole. I mean, it's not just one map. There are dozens of maps that show
Hmm.
Antarctica and the northern latitudes completely free of ice. So I do support my theories from these articles and the things they're finding in these remote places, that maps correlate quite well, that
Hmm.
this shift in weather um, is relatively recent. And I think it correlates quite nicely again with this previous age that we're discussing. Whether it is the millennial reign or what. It's certainly there's lots of holes to fill there, but there's lots of evidence that we are a culture that has been reset and had all of our true history rewritten,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all kind of lost. As a whole, there are certainly pockets of people who are remembering, right,
Mm-hmm.
and coming back to this. But yeah, I
That's
remember
well.
as a kid. I'm sure you probably felt the same way. I think we talked about this a little bit. I remember as a child going, "What is this world I live in?"
I
I
know.
had a really hard time. People call it social anxiety, but for me, I remember the internal dialogue I had as a child, and I felt so out of place.
Yes.
I thought this new world that I was born into feels very, very wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of going back to that residence, feeling, everything felt completely out of whack. And it took many, many years in my youth to come to some kind of balance. And then, the understanding, or at least my understanding, came much later. But I do find that that's kind of a common denominator with people that have these kind of awakenings, is that they really had a hard time in their youth and felt very much out of place, or that felt disconnected. And they looked at society as a whole and thought this is just kind of like this weird rat race, and nothing feels connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it. I mean, that's exactly the way I felt, especially looking at how insane the adults were in my life. I was like,
Same,
these guys are running it, and then listening to the news growing up. Like my parents were addicted to having the news on, and like,
same here.
I mean, just the insanity of the news was like, this is the insane asylum.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad was an alcoholic, and I had a lot of fear and and felt lost a lot. But thankfully in my older years I've come to understand that a lot of people have that same feeling. I'm sure my father did, and
Hmm.
that it was so overwhelming, the only way to turn it off was alcohol and substance abuse. And that's a lot of people.
It definitely is. They have to
This is
buffer
a
one way or
tough.
another.
Exactly, well said. It's a buffer, and it's
Hmm.
just like the noise gets, it's like earplugs. That's kind
Yep.
of the way I look at it, is they shut themselves out because the noise is so loud.
Hmm.
And it takes a lot of time and effort to tune yourself and how you look at the world. And once you kind of start to mess with those knobs, everything calms down.
Yep.
And for me, that was after that motorcycle accident that I told you about.
Yes.
I had a motorcycle accident. I had an out of body experience during the whole thing, and my life was never the same.
Hmm.
I just started to, everything that the people were telling me wasn't adding up. And I was like, I guess I got to look into this OBE stuff, because everyone's telling me I was hallucinating. And then that just was, that's the door.
Hmm.
And then I never took other people's words for anything again. And I just started to answer all my own questions. And then once you realize I got a lot of questions that I don't
Right.
want answered, that you go through these stages of waking up, or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing, but it can be hard at times for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, you are definitely my NDE out of body experience brother.
Yep, I remember your story.
Yeah, so we get to kind of let everybody else know it's going to be okay. You're going to be
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, that's the
Yeah.
biggest feeling I had.
Yep.
And when I stepped out of my body and watched my physical body have the accident, and realized that my consciousness and my body were two separate things,
Yes.
and outside of the body, I I there was never a concern. There was no like,
None.
there's no anxiety.
Right.
Everything is what it is.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where you're trying to align the spiritual side of things with your physical, emotional body.
Right.
And that's where substance abuse and depression and all these things. And as soon as you can kind of connect the two, everything, it's just like, oh, it's that big sigh, when you feel that kind of pressure in your chest.
Hmm.
And some people live with that forever. And yeah. But anyways, we always talk about behind the scenes how we're going to share a bunch of material and we're going to talk about, but I love our conversations are always very organic, which I love and
Yes.
I prefer. But when it comes to sharing material that may be kind of eye opening for your listeners, we unfortunately never get to them. But maybe, like I was joking around, we'll have to do a part two, and we'll really dive deeper into actual historical examples of things not only they're finding,
Hmm.
uncovering explanations that go into some of these asylums and these capitol buildings, and we can go a little deeper into the actual idea that the new world, i.e., the Americas, is actually the old world, and history as we know it has been completely inverted.
That'd be perfect. That'd
I
be
know we're
perfect.
probably getting close to the end of this.
Yes.
So as it is your show, well, how do you want to wrap this up? Is there anything that you'd like to finish up or go back to
I
before we
share
call it in? And
I share the sentiment that, we always have a very good rapport and always have our ways of being tangential that actually still fit the theme, which I appreciate. I guess the core of what I've been wrestling with is how should I say it? Sphering the cube. I
yeah,
know I know God makes sense. I know existence makes sense. I know it has logos.
mm,
So when I have contradiction, I know the contradiction is because either I'm misunderstanding something through an invalid or a false way of perceiving, and or it's a lie. It's something that's actually not true, and that's what's causing the dis-ease in my consciousness. And I have enough years under my belt
mm,
now where I really trust that now. And because I do have an overall faith in the logos of reality, and that God does love us and God does want us to know whatever we want to know. Like if you ask, he gives. Like that's in my life,
100%.
that's what he does. He's like,
Agreed.
oh, you want this? Okay. Oh, you want this? And so I have, for whatever reason, probably to work out some family karma, I really want to know the historicity of, my lineage and just the world in general. Because when you don't have the roots of your history, you can't reach as high as possible. Like if you have shallow roots, you're kind of hamstrung with how high you can actually be. And so,
Yeah, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you're coming from.
exactly. And so for me, I really look at that. And also, history rhymes. It does. So if
Yeah,
you actually have some real historical information, then you're not going to be projecting into the future utter garbage. Like one of the reasons why I loved flamenco so much was he was a statistician, and he was just like, with with all the wars, with this, and this that they say happen, guys. If history was as long as they say it is, we'd have like 20 billion people here. And when he said that, it took me back to like 400 level economics and looking at statistical precursors. Like the numbers just don't add up. They just
No.
don't. And I know God makes sense. I know creation is logos. So in that, I'm like, this
Yeah, I
is,
remember Flamenco referencing something that if he followed the actual plot of the growth of humans, that the first human was like only 1,000 years ago.
yeah.
I mean, obviously, I can't remember exactly how he said it, but that he's talking about his journey to questioning everything. And
Hmm.
he's like, I just did the math, and the math doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
He's like, the idea of Noah and the flood and only a remnant of human surviving. He's like, that's the only way. We had to have been this dense population, and then something had happened. Otherwise, all this other history we're given doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
So yeah, the biblical stuff, like we've said, so much of that resonates with what's going on right now.
Hmm.
That's what draws me the most to the millennial reign stuff. I can't say I have tons of material that makes me feel like that's a certainty, but
Hmm.
just going off some of the subjects we covered today, it certainly seems, I like to use the word biblical, that we're on a biblical timeline.
Yeah.
And I trust God. So whatever's happening, good and bad, is, I believe, in a sense, we do have free reign and free will, but it's the story has been written and we're making little alterations. But overall, the theme is there.
Right.
That's how I feel right now. Sorry to cut you off, but yeah, I just wanted to
No,
jump in with that.
that's perfect. Let's end it there. Next time I will have more experience with, this is my maiden voyage on OBS. So I think it's pretty good. I'll have more of a protocol of how to actually access photos and all the rest of it as I get to learn this system. But Ben, you know, this is awesome. Ben. I shouldn't call you Ben. um, I always love catching up with you. I'm glad that that you took the time to hang out. And
It's my
yeah,
pleasure.
all I have to say is let's not wait as long next time. And I'll send you a couple things, collaborations I've done with some of the people that are kind of head of the class when it comes to the millennial reign
Please.
stuff.
I would love to have a little more
Yeah,
of their opinions and material so I can kind of share my stuff and then we can kind of interlace it in our next talk. I think that'd be great.
that'd be perfect. I know JT Joe. He knows your work because I've mentioned you a couple times in our work together, and he's like, he's aware of the Archivist on YouTube. So he has he's the one who brought to me the attention of Gunnar Heinzen, the person that was doing all the
Mm,
archaeological work in Germany. So yeah, I'm gonna mesh everything together with this, and we'll put out a really good product for people. So at the very least, there can be the understanding that the 1800s was a massive pivot, like
yeah,
a massive pivot.
100%.
Like in
Yeah,
a
without a doubt. Without a doubt. And you can watch just a few of my videos and at least go, okay, there's enough here to at least interest me in exploring the subject matter on my own.
Mhm.
I got almost 300 videos on my channel, and you just watch the monster ones where these animals they were finding
You're right.
really go, okay, so what, wait, the dinosaurs were still roaming here in Earth, in the 1800s, and we were still hunting them.
Hmm.
Let alone the subject with history and some of the things we talked about, these buildings and the things they're digging up, but yeah, there's a lot, there, so it could definitely fill anybody's interest. I have it broken up in categories where you can dive into Atlantis, you can talk about the Etruscans, which I have a 3 video Etruscan series that'll really show you Rome as we know it today is built on an ancient foundation, and their roots come from America.
Hmm.
And um, Rome as we know it today is built on somebody else's work, kind of like what we were talking about here with these
Yes.
cities, where we just that narrative exists everywhere. But America's so fresh to that pivot that there's a lot more material to sink our teeth into. And
Beautiful.
I'd be hard pressed to say there's anybody who's done as much as I have in that time frame from an actual literary example basis, i.e., being books and newspapers,
Hmm.
showing that even authors and explorers in the 1800s were questioning everything they'd been told
Right.
about America and its foundations. That's now, thankfully through the archiving of these old newspapers, I've had access to, and I'm now sharing a lot of my labors with your listeners.
Beautiful. So you're the archivist on YouTube. Is there anywhere else that people can find you?
Um, yeah, I have 20,000 posts on Twitter, on X, um, and X gets better every day. You can search my profile, 1_analog_9 is
Hmm.
my handle on Instagram, YouTube, and X. And there's, like I mentioned, there's 300 videos on YouTube, 270 or something. Uh, Endless hours. I have 24 episodes of Anomalous America, and I'm working on my next episode, which is going to be probably a joint venture of North and South Dakota, the Dakota Territory. So that's going to be coming out here in the next week or so. But yeah, so tons of material out there. I've been on your show a few times. So for listeners that are going to be new to me, that's a good place to start. There's lots
Awesome.
there.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, my friend, you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah. Stay in touch and please forward the millennial stuff to me, please. I look forward to diving into that a little bit more.
Great. Yeah,